The sun had just started to sink behind the dusty ridges of Wyoming when little Annie stood in front of the towering cowboy, her tiny hands gripping the hem of her torn dress. Her voice trembled as she looked up at him and said, "You need a wife and I need a dad." The giant man, known across the valley as Colt Walker, a loner, a mountain of muscle and silence, froze. No one had spoken to him like that in years. His rough heart, long buried beneath grief and dust, suddenly ached with something he hadn't felt in forever. Colt's weathered face twitched with confusion. He wasn't the kind of man who dealt with feelings or children. The saloon folk said he'd lost his wife in childbirth, and ever since, he'd lived on the far edge of his ranch, talking to no one but his horse. Annie's eyes, though bright, innocent and begging, stirred something deep in him. He cleared his throat, trying to sound gruff. "Where's your ma, kid?" Her lip quivered and she whispered, "Gone. They said she ain't coming back." The wind howled, filling the silence between them like a lonely song. He knelt, his shadow swallowing her whole. The big man's calloused hands hovered awkwardly before finally resting on her small shoulders. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he muttered. Annie only shook her head. "I wasn't alone till this morning." Colt's chest tightened. He saw it, the dirt on her cheeks, the tear tracks, the bare feet. She had nowhere to go. Without another word, he lifted her gently onto his horse, his heart thudding like thunder in the canyon. That night he rode toward his ranch, unsure what he'd just agreed to. The cabin sat in silence when they arrived, moonlight casting long shadows across the wooden porch. Annie clung to his arm as he pushed open the door. The old place smelled of smoke and cedar, cold from years of loneliness. Colt stirred the fire back to life, and the little girl's eyes sparkled in the glow. "Do you live here all by yourself?" she asked softly. He grunted, pouring water into a kettle. "Ain't much company for a man like me," she smiled faintly. "Maybe now you got some." Her words hit him harder than any bullet ever could. As the fire crackled, Colt found himself watching her sleep curled up in his late wife's quilt. He should have taken her to town, found someone proper to care for her. But something stopped him. That little hand clutching the blanket, that quiet trust, it did something to the hardened cowboy's heart. By morning, when she woke up and smiled, calling him Mr. Colt, the grizzled rancher felt the walls he'd built start to crumble. He muttered under his breath, "Guess I ain't sending you away just yet, kid." Days turned into weeks. Annie followed him everywhere, from mending fences to feeding the horses. She asked endless questions, always laughing, always curious. For the first time in years, Colt found himself talking again. He told her about the stars, about the rivers, and even about herding wild mustangs. She listened like it was magic. The townsfolk noticed the change too. The man once called the Silent Giant now rode into town with a little girl on his saddle, her giggles echoing through Main Street. Some smiled, some whispered, but Colt didn't care anymore. One morning, Annie ran off chasing a stray lamb near the river. When Colt found her, she was stuck in the mud, crying. He waded in, scooping her up with panic in his eyes. "Don't you ever scare me like that again," he barked, voice shaking. Annie sniffled. "You came for me." That simple statement broke him again. He hugged her tight, the first real embrace he'd given anyone since his wife died. "Always will, kid. Always will," he whispered, his voice rough but full of truth. That evening a stranger rode up, a woman named Clara, new in town, looking for work. She was young, but carried the quiet strength of someone who'd survived her own storms. Annie ran to her, tugging her hand excitedly. "You can stay with us. Mr. Colt needs a wife." Both adults froze, embarrassed. Colt's cheeks flushed under his beard, and Clara laughed softly, her eyes glimmering. "Oh, does he now?" Annie nodded firmly. "And I need a mom." The silence that followed was softer this time, full of hope instead of pain. Clara stayed on as a cook and caretaker, but soon her laughter filled the cabin like sunlight. Colt found himself smiling at her stories, her kindness, her courage. She didn't fear his size or his silence, she just understood him. Annie watched with glee, whispering to her doll, "Told you it'd work." On the ranch, things slowly changed. More flowers in the windows, more laughter at dinner. Colt, who'd once thought himself too broken to love again, started believing maybe life had given him a second chance. Months later, one cold winter night, Annie woke from a nightmare. Colt rushed in, holding her as she sobbed. "You ain't alone anymore, sweetheart," he whispered. Clara stood in the doorway, her hand over her heart. That night, by the fire, Colt finally spoke. "Clara, I ain't much with words, but if you'd stay, I'd be mighty grateful." She smiled, eyes glistening. "I already have." Annie, pretending to be asleep, grinned under her quilt. For the first time in years, the ranch didn't feel lonely. It felt like home. When spring came, wildflowers covered the valley, and the ranch thrived again. The little girl who'd once begged for a family now had one, a father who'd protect her with his life, and a woman who loved her like her own. Colt Walker, the giant cowboy, no longer rode alone. And sometimes, when the wind blew across the prairie, you could almost hear the echo of a child's voice saying, "You needed a wife, and I needed a dad," and he'd smile, knowing she'd been right all along.